There was actually a series. There was 3 different articles that we have posted. But the main article was about, and I think this is really, really good news, actually. But it was about the Philippines' ban on child marriage. There is kind of a catch-22 though, and it really does get into just how far we still have to go in terms of child marriage laws, not just in the Philippines, but worldwide. Because they talk about exemptions being made for religious groups to have more time to sort of adjust to this law. So if you read the article, it reads as very positive in the beginning, but then quickly you start to see sort of a negative. Well, maybe it's not all that great because some children are still allowed to get married off because the religious leaders need time to change their sort of approach, right? And so that's a little bit concerning. But then the other articles, they go into different facts about child marriage laws around the world and where we're at, where really we've got a long way to go. Um, and one of them discusses child grooms, which we rarely in just casual conversation talk about. When we hear about child marriage, it's very commonly we think of little girls getting married off to older men or whatever the case may be. So one of the articles from NPR touches on child grooms. So I had a lot of observations on these articles, and I really can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. But I'm going to give you guys first dibs.
Yeah, I'm going to give August first dibs because I also have a lot to say on this. I think myself and Laura both have kind of, from very different perspective, a lot of background with Islam. So I'd like to just give August an opportunity to have her say before we kind of take up.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say that I will try to stay as calm as I possibly can because this topic is enraging. And I wanted to say that I was surprised, but not necessarily that the kind of practice or legality of it was changed, but more along the lines that it said something about a prison sentence of up to like 12 years, I think it was, which obviously is way too short for the crime. But, you know, I feel like for the as awful as it is to say, the culture that it's in, that is very surprising that it wasn't just like, okay, we'll make it illegal, but it'll just be a slap on the wrist, you know? And so we'll have well, it's illegal, but we won't actually do anything about it. So seeing that they actually had a prison sentence was astonishing to me, just knowing somewhat about this. And then also the fact that this was going all the way up to 18 years old, or I guess 17 years old or whatever it was. I honestly, when I read it, I was like, okay, so what are they considering a child? Because it's like, okay, some of them are saying once they hit puberty. Well, some people, oh my gosh, it's so disgusting to say, but some people hit puberty at 10 years old.
10,
And so you're saying
yeah.
a 10-year-old is ready to be a husband or wife? Absolutely not. And so I thought the fact that not only did it have a prison sentence, but that it went all the way up until, you know, late teens. I thought that was amazing. Obviously, came way too late, but as awful as it is to say, you know, better late than never. And I hope they actually put a stop to it. And the whole cultural thing, it just if you need time to switch your culture from, I don't know, eating a certain type of food, or like some cultures take their shoes off when they walk into the house or something of that sort, I could understand if they're like, hey, we need some time to get used to this. This is children being married off to grown adults. I do not care that your culture says that that's okay, just like the genital mutilation stuff, not to get off topic, but I don't care about your culture. In terms of this, I think it's a case by case basis, but before I explode, I'll pass it off to you guys.
All right, Richard. She got me all fired up too because August, you made a lot of points that I was dying to make. So I will reiterate them shortly. But Richard, I'm going to give you a go.
Yeah, children being married off. Let's look at the numbers because I'm going to say this slowly, so to give people time to digest this. 115 million boys.
Mm-hmm.
115 million. 650 million girls are married off as children. Now just let that sink in a little bit. Think about what August just said and let the numbers sink in.
Yeah.
This isn't a thing that should be, slow cultural change. This is something that should be stopped immediately. And and I can't remember the exact country, so I'm not going to quote a particular country. In some particular Islamic countries, the law already states that they can't get married until they're much older, much older. But still, it's allowed under religious freedom for Muslims to marry young, even though the law of the country states otherwise. And this is a thing. We need to we need to put an end to it. In this article, as I said earlier, I've got so much to say on it. I think one important point to make, because we are talking about, the article does talk about an Islamic country. It's not just an Islamic custom. There are
Right. That is an
different
important
religions.
distinction to make.
Happens
Different,
in the United States, I know.
yeah. There are different religions, different cultures, and yeah, August, that's the exact next point I was going to make. It's not just these countries. This takes place in Britain, in the US. This is something we all need to fight on the local level, as well as just pointing the finger at those people over there, because this is something that goes on all over the world. Child
And
trafficking, sex trafficking is still a thing worldwide.
to your point, and I want to just throw this out there really quick, it's also woefully underreported. So you said that,
Oh, yeah.
over 600 million and over 100 million, those are reported or known or estimated, right? But oftentimes, especially in countries like Britain or the United States, because we have such strict laws against it, when it does happen, it's not reported at all. So, I mean, they're not going down to the courthouse and saying, "Hey, this is my 15-year-old bride. Like, let us sign the paperwork." It's all done behind closed doors. So if you think those numbers are atrocious, imagine what they actually are.
That's the scary thing about it, for sure. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a few states where someone maybe 16 could get married to someone as long as they have parents' consent, and that could be completely wrong, but I feel like I've heard something about that. Even if it wasn't a law, like Laura said, it's definitely happening behind closed doors. For sure, absolutely.
So in my state, the state that I live in, the age of consent, the legal age of consent is 16. Yeah.
It is here
So,
too, in Britain.
yeah.
Yep.
Which I mean, I guess is better than no age of consent, but it's still way too young. So, it's almost not. Oh, but that's, you know what? The age of consent is for sex though, which I mean, it can still be very problematic, but it's different for marriage. So I should take back what I said without research. Like I know for sure that's the age of consent for sex, but in terms of getting married, I'm not sure. Either way, like when you're
It
talking
doesn't
about
even matter.
yeah, you're talking about adult males. Now, if you're talking about a 16 and a 17-year-old having sex versus 17 and
Right.
18, I don't have any problem with that. If you're talking about a 16-year-old, getting approached by a 45-year-old, now I have some issues.
And
And
against their will, which, of course, children can't really consent anyway. But these children don't want this. I mean, I've seen so many of the videos and just I can't even get through it because it's just absolutely gut wrenching. Absolutely gut wrenching.
Yeah. Even if they do want it, they're not old enough to really know what that actually means, right?
Yeah.
And they've
So,
been raised in it. Most
right.
of them have been raised in it, and so they're like, okay, well, this is just
This is normal.
what happens when you get to
Yeah.
puberty. You get married off to somebody, and like that's just how that goes. So like that doesn't make it okay at all. And they like their brains are not developed enough to know what's going on, and that's it's so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah.
Th-
So,
th- This
go ahead, Richard.
this article did say that there was opposition from both indigenous and Islamic communities. It's not just the Islamic community,
Right.
but uh, the excuses given by the Islamic representatives, because I tried to do a little bit of digging and I couldn't find much on the indigenous kind of viewpoint on this. So I was, I was left kind of just speaking on the Islamic point. But that's a good point that in Islam, these girls are often married to guys in the 30s, in the 40s,
Mm-hmm.
and in some cases they're only 8, 9 years old. And this this is one of the problems of religion, because it's the taking the example from Muhammad himself, which is he married Aisha when she was, I think she was
Purportedly
six,
6 and then
6
consummated at
and
9.
consummated
6?
it at
I was gonna
9.
say 8 or 9.
Yeah,
That
no,
was when the
the married.
consummation would have.
Yeah, there is uh, some argument about the exact age, but it's from the sources I've seen, it's probably that she were married at 6 and consummated at 9 years old, which is absolutely appalling. And
That makes me nauseous. I
this is
feel
why,
sick.
yeah, this is why these Islamic cultures, this is so prevalent, because it's following the example of Muhammad.
Mhm.
And there are uh, as we were talking about, progressive Muslims who kind of argue against this, and but I don't think there's, without going into all the details of the surahs and the scholars and the background of that, there is a good argument that this is authentic teaching, that Muhammad did marry at that age, marry Aisha at that age.
And it was common in the Arab world at that time. So people see it as super controversial, and certainly today it is. Like, why would they have that in their religion, or why would they include those details? Why would they even have a hadith like that? It was super normal back then. It was super wrong back then too. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, but it's not so unusual for them to have written about it, or for that to have been something that was included in the faith at that time, because it was so normal. So what gets me is the lack of, there's no real critical thinking to the people who are like, "Well, it's a hadith and it says so, so I'm gonna be allowed to do it, and so I'm gonna do it." There's no there's a huge disconnect with them with reality, where, like, whether or not it's authentic or not, whether or not they did something like that at the time or not, right here, right now, what is the right thing to do? And to continue to have that kind of like, to me, I see a lot of reason to believe that a lot of the hadiths, like, authentic or not, I'm kind of a mythicist in terms of Muhammad and Jesus, where there's no really, really huge hardcore proof that Muhammad even existed, although there's more so than Jesus. But okay, he existed. Okay, he married this girl and he consummated it at 9. There needs to be some sort of uh mental connection that these people have, that what they're doing right here, right now is horrible and wrong and harms people. And that's what really gets me, is that doesn't seem to be occurring. There's a lot of defense of the practice rather than a lot of reflecting on it. Um,
And context needs, I think, to be given here for myself and Laura, like I said earlier,
mhm,
both have insights into Islam from different
yeah.
perspectives. I think the context here, because a lot of the people see the Quran and think, that's where all the Islamic rules come from. Most of Sharia law comes from the Hadith and the Sunnah, which are the words and the actions of Muhammad, because Muhammad was considered to be the best of men. And his actions and his words are what inform, even so more so than the Quran in some cases, what actually goes on in Islamic culture. And that's what a lot of these laws are based around. The fact that Muhammad did it is, you know, striking. For these cultures, it is something to be adhered to and looked up to, because he was considered the best of people.
Yeah. Well, and and I should clarify that as well. There's this overarching belief that whatever the morals are of whatever society at whatever time in history, if it was good for Muhammad to have done something, then it was good. Just period.
Yeah, definitely. But as we said earlier, this isn't just about young girls. You know, child marriage goes on around the world,
Mhm.
and and young boys are affected as well. So uh, we did have a look at an article talking about the young men as well, from UNICEF.
Mhm.
Um, it was an article from npr.org, and it
Yes.
stated that in its first ever in-depth analysis of child grooms published in 2019, UNICEF estimates 115 million boys and men around the world were married as children. So what are your kind of guys' views on male child marriage? Because it's something that as Laura said earlier, that's not touched upon very often.
I guess I'll jump in here. I think it is very, very common for boys, especially, to be excluded from conversations, not only of this, but of sexual abuse in general. When many girl survivors of sexual violence will come forward, I think a lot of us are coming to the point where we believe them, and we're moving towards a society who takes that kind of stuff seriously. But then we still have these boys and men coming forward who are then, well, you're a guy, so clearly your sexual desires say, the stereotypes of your sex and gender say that you should have liked it. And we don't nearly talk about the mental health issue among men and boys, at the very least in the United States, but I guarantee it's not just here. And it's just getting so overlooked. Don't cry, be a man. And so, while we can be like, oh, these girls, oh my gosh, these little girls, it's like, okay, the little boys too,
Mhm.
they're just as vulnerable. They're just as, mentally stunted and not developed as not enough. They still don't know what's going on. And so I think that's definitely something that needs to be addressed more. We need to get it to the point where it's on equal ground. In all cases, but especially on this topic. And also, just kind of personally, I am in my early 20s, and I see, honestly, boys that are 18, 19 years old, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's an infant. I want to pinch your cheeks. Like, you're so, like, little. Like, oh my gosh, you're a baby. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how can anyone in their 20s and older find a teenager or younger attractive? It blows my mind. I just genuinely do not fundamentally understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, Laura, what do you think?
I think you nailed it with the psychological impact. It's funny because we can easily acknowledge that rape or sexual assault or marriage has a negative psychological impact on women, and we can have a lot of empathy and compassion for them. But there's a lot of shame that goes into what a person experiences when they experience something like a sexual assault. And so, if you think that women feel ashamed with all the resources we're given and how much we're encouraged to talk about it and all the support that we get, just imagine how much harder it is for a boy or a male. And I think the article put it really well. So I'm going to read the article, a little quote right here. But they said, young men force themselves to be adults, but they don't have the psychological resources to cope with all the demands. There is more isolation, alienation, and a lot of physical pain within themselves. They're not skilled enough to provide the good, affectionate, emotional support and use a punitive parenting style. They don't want to face the difficult emotions of the child because they never got the opportunity to deal with their own emotional difficulties when they were quite young. Now, this is talking about the negative impact of marriage, right? And of just being forced to grow up too fast. And you add that definite added trauma when you start talking about sexual assault. That's even worse. And I would assume that in these cases of child marriage with the male grooms, it's likely a little bit of both. So Richard, what are your closing thoughts on this before we move on from this article?
I think regarding the Philippines article specifically,
Hmm.
the last word should go to Christine Rosary Uzon Chavez, who is a lawyer and executive director of the Philippine Commission on Women, who says the law finally recognizes child marriage as a crime across the Philippines. It addresses legal gaps that allow the practice that threatens the health, well being, and development of children. With this enactment, we can protect girls from being trapped in an unwanted marriage, early pregnancy, violence, and other violations to their human rights and destiny. And as our good friend Cynthia MacDonald would say, a step in the right direction.
I love it. That's a really good way to wrap it. So we still have a long way to go and it's still happening, but at least if we can learn anything from this article, it's that we're continuing to move at least in the right direction.